The morning chaos of Liberty International Airport hummed like a well-worn symphony. Announcements crackled overhead, hurried footsteps blended with the rumble of rolling luggage, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air. But for Monica Evans, today wasn't just another travel day. It was the day her dreams would take flight. Draped in a custom-designed emerald green gown that shimmered with understated elegance, Monica moved through the terminal with quiet confidence. Every step seemed to command attention, not just for the gown's beauty, but for the way Monica carried herself, like a queen who didn't need a crown to prove her worth. She was en route to Paris, where her newest fashion line was set to debut. This was supposed to be a celebration of her hard work, a culmination of years of resilience and ambition. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As Monica approached the TSA security checkpoint, her gaze caught on a man standing stiffly by the scanner. His name tag read, G. Roberts, and his expression was one of faint amusement, like he'd already decided he didn't like her. Middle-aged, with a uniform that seemed a size too small, Roberts exuded the aura of someone who took pleasure in wielding authority over others. "Step aside, ma'am," Roberts said, his tone sharp enough to cut through the noise of the terminal. Monica hesitated, a flicker of unease running through her. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm but measured. Roberts folded his arms, his eyes lingering on her gown longer than necessary. "Your dress," he said with a smirk. "It looks suspicious." Monica blinked, stunned. Suspicious? This was a gown, not a weapon. "Excuse me?" she said, her tone laced with disbelief. "Step aside," Roberts repeated, louder this time. He gestured toward a roped-off area, clearly enjoying the growing attention of the passengers behind her. Monica reluctantly complied, clutching her bag tighter. She had been through airport security countless times before, but this felt different. There was something in Roberts's gaze, something sharp, cruel, and oddly familiar. It wasn't about the dress, it was about her. Before Monica could process what was happening, Roberts stepped forward and grabbed the hem of her gown. With a rough yank, he tore the fabric. The sound of ripping silk echoed across the terminal like a gunshot, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. Monica gasped, frozen in shock. The once flawless gown now hung in tatters, the tear running up her leg and exposing her skin. Her hands instinctively reached to cover herself, her face flushing with humiliation. Around her, the crowd erupted into a low buzz of whispers and gasps. Robert smirked, unrepentant. "Guess it wasn't as sturdy as it looked. Maybe it's not as expensive as you thought." The words hit Monica like a slap. She felt her chest tighten, anger bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't just about the dress, it was about being reduced, once again, to someone's target. As the whispers grew louder, Monica scanned the crowd. Some faces mirrored her shock, others, judgment. A young mother shielded her child's eyes. An older man shook his head and muttered something under his breath, but no one stepped forward, no one said a word. Until now. Monica squared her shoulders, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "What you just did was unprofessional, unnecessary, and unacceptable," she said, her tone cutting through the terminal noise. "You think you can humiliate me and walk away?" Robert shrugged, his smirk unwavering. "File a complaint if you want. Won't change anything." Oh, but it would. Little did Roberts know, the woman standing before him wasn't just another traveler. And this was about to become the worst mistake of his life. Stay tuned, because Monica wasn't about to let this end here. Monica stood there, her gown torn, her dignity bruised, but her resolve unshaken. The whispers from the crowd buzzed around her like static noise, but she tuned it out. Her focus zeroed in on the man who had caused this mess. Roberts had already turned his back, moving on to the next passenger as if nothing had happened. Monica clenched her fists. This wasn't the first time she'd been humiliated by someone who saw her as less than, but today, it would be the last. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, pulling it out of her handbag. She quickly scrolled to a familiar name and pressed call. The line rang twice before a deep, steady voice answered. "Monica," the voice said, filled with warmth and concern. "You're at the airport already?" "Caleb." Her voice cracked for the first time as she said her husband's name. She swallowed hard, fighting back the tears threatening to spill. "There's a problem. A big one." Caleb Evans was more than Monica's husband. He was a powerhouse in the world of aviation. As the co-owner of Liberty International, Caleb was a man who didn't just own a piece of the airport. He owned respect wherever he went. And right now, Monica needed that respect. "Tell me what happened," Caleb said, his voice growing sharp, the concern replaced by a controlled fury Monica knew all too well. "It's a TSA agent," Monica began, her voice shaking with both anger and disbelief. "He tore my dress, he grabbed it and ripped it right in front of everyone. And then he laughed." There was silence on the other end of the line, but Monica could almost feel the heat of Caleb's rage through the phone. He never raised his voice, but when Caleb Evans got angry, things happened. "Stay right there," he said, his tone icy. "I'm coming." "Caleb," Monica said, trying to steady herself. "Don't cause a scene. I can handle this." "No," Caleb replied firmly. "You've handled enough. This isn't just about you, Monica. It's about making sure no one else has to deal with something like this ever again." Before Monica could respond, Caleb hung up. She stared at the phone for a moment, her mind racing. Around her, the terminal buzzed with activity, but Monica was still. Her heart pounded as she waited, a mixture of relief and anticipation building in her chest. She knew Caleb would come through for her, but she also knew this wasn't just his fight, it was hers too. A soft voice broke through her thoughts. "Miss, are you okay?" Monica turned to see a woman in her 60s standing nearby. She was dressed in a simple cardigan and slacks, her kind eyes filled with concern. "I saw what happened," the woman said, her voice gentle but firm. "That was uncalled for. You didn't deserve it." Monica managed a small smile, though her throat felt tight. "Thank you," she said quietly. The woman reached out, placing a comforting hand on Monica's arm. "Don't let them get away with it," she said. "You've got every right to stand up for yourself. If you need a witness, I'll speak up. People like him. They count on us staying quiet. Don't let him win." Monica nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't alone. And as Caleb's name lit up her phone screen again with a text that simply read, "I'm here," Monica knew the fight was just beginning. What happens when Caleb walks into the terminal? Will his power and influence be enough to hold someone accountable, or will this battle expose deeper flaws within the system? And how far is Monica willing to go to demand the respect she deserves? Stay with us. Things are just heating up. The clicking of polished leather shoes against the terminal floor cut through the ambient noise like a metronome. Heads turned as Caleb Evans strode into the security checkpoint area. At 6 feet 3 inches, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his commanding presence was impossible to ignore. His dark eyes scanned the room, locking onto Monica in an instant. Monica straightened as she saw him. Relief washed over her, but it was tempered by the simmering anger she still felt. Caleb's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as he took in her torn gown, but his jaw clenched and his attention shifted. Caleb didn't walk. He owned the space as he moved toward the security desk, exuding an air of authority that demanded respect. Behind the desk stood Samantha Pierce, the TSA supervisor on duty, who glanced up from her clipboard and froze when she recognized Caleb. "Mr. Evans," Samantha stammered, her tone shifting from casual to professional in an instant. "I wasn't expecting." "You weren't expecting me because you weren't doing your job," Caleb interrupted, his voice steady but sharp enough to slice through the tension. "Where's the agent who assaulted my wife?" Samantha blinked, caught off guard. "Assaulted?" she repeated, her voice faltering. I don't have any reports of." "That's because your agent thought it was acceptable to tear my wife's dress apart in public," Caleb snapped, his voice rising just enough to draw the attention of the growing crowd. "And from what I understand, he laughed about it afterward." Monica stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Caleb. Her presence added weight to his words, her head held high despite the humiliation she had endured. Samantha opened her mouth to respond, but Caleb cut her off again. "Before you start spinning excuses," he said, "let me remind you that I'm not just another traveler passing through your checkpoint. I'm Caleb Evans, co-owner of this airport, and right now, I'm questioning whether the people running it are competent enough to handle their responsibilities." The color drained from Samantha's face as she realized who she was dealing with. Behind her, Roberts shuffled uncomfortably, trying to remain inconspicuous. But Caleb wasn't about to let him off the hook. "You," Caleb said, pointing directly at Roberts. The agent flinched, but Caleb's voice was like steel. "Step forward." Roberts hesitated, but Samantha gave him a subtle nod, and he reluctantly moved closer. His usual smug demeanor had vanished, replaced by nervousness. "Is it true?" Caleb began, his voice low but filled with a quiet fury. "That you grabbed my wife's gown and tore it?" Roberts swallowed hard. "Sir, it was a misunderstanding," he said, his words stumbling over themselves. "She was being uncooperative, and I—" "Uncooperative?" Caleb repeated, his tone incredulous. He glanced at Monica. "Did you refuse any instructions?" Monica's voice was steady, though anger still simmered beneath the surface. "I followed every protocol. He targeted me because of my appearance." The crowd murmured, their whispers growing louder. Passengers who had witnessed the incident began nodding, their faces reflecting their discomfort with what they had seen. A man in a baseball cap called out, "Yeah, I saw it too, it wasn't right." Caleb turned back to Roberts. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" he asked, his voice ice cold. Roberts looked to Samantha for support, but she remained silent, her gaze fixed on the floor. Finally he muttered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Not good enough," Caleb said, his voice cutting through the air. "You don't get to humiliate someone and walk away with a half-hearted apology. There will be consequences." Monica placed a hand on Caleb's arm, drawing his attention. "Caleb," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "this isn't just about me. It's about every person who's ever been treated like they don't matter. I want this addressed, not just for today, but for the future." Her words hung in the air, resonating with the crowd around them. Caleb nodded, understanding her unspoken message. This wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was about setting a precedent. Turning back to Samantha, Caleb said, "Here's what's going to happen. Roberts will be suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. TSA will issue a public apology to my wife, and I expect a formal commitment to retrain your staff to ensure this never happens again." Samantha nodded quickly, her voice trembling. "Of course, Mr. Evans. We'll take action right away." But Caleb wasn't done. "And," he added, his tone sharp, "you'll make sure this apology is as public as the humiliation my wife endured. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly how Liberty International handles its customers." Robert's face turned pale, and the crowd broke into murmurs of approval. Monica stood tall, her composure unshaken. For the first time since the incident, she felt a sense of vindication, but deep down she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a larger fight. Just as the crowd began to disperse, satisfied with Caleb's demands, Monica caught something in Robert's expression. It wasn't just fear or embarrassment, it was defiance, a flicker of something darker. For a moment she hesitated, unsure whether to let it go. But then her instincts kicked in. This wasn't over, not yet. "Wait," Monica said, her voice cutting through the chatter. The crowd turned back, their curiosity reignited. Caleb glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "I need to know something." She stepped toward Roberts, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Why did you target me?" she asked, her tone steady but piercing. "Out of all the passengers here, why me? Was it the dress, the way I looked, or was it something else?" Roberts stiffened, glancing nervously at Samantha, who avoided his gaze. I don't know what you mean," he stammered. "Yes, you do," Monica pressed, her voice rising. "This wasn't random. You saw me and you made a choice. So tell me, why?" The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and even Samantha shifted uncomfortably. Caleb folded his arms, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and simmering anger. Roberts finally broke, his voice cracking under the pressure. "You think you're special because you wear expensive clothes and walk around like you own the place," he spat, his mask of professionalism slipping. "People like you think you can get away with anything." "People like me?" Monica repeated, her voice sharp. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Roberts hesitated, realizing he had said too much, but the damage was done. The crowd's murmurs turned to gasps, and Samantha's face turned an uncomfortable shade of red. Monica stood tall, her eyes locked on Roberts, daring him to continue. "You don't belong here," he muttered, barely audible but loud enough for those closest to hear. And there it was, the truth. This wasn't about her dress, her compliance, or anything else Roberts had claimed. It was about prejudice, a deep-rooted bias that had festered beneath the surface until it exploded in an act of public humiliation. For a moment, the terminal was silent. Then a young man in a hoodie stepped forward. "That's enough," he said, his voice firm. "You can't talk to her like that." Others began to chime in, their voices growing louder. "She didn't do anything wrong. This is discrimination. Fire him already." The tide was turning. What had started as a humiliating incident for Monica was now becoming a rallying cry for justice. People pulled out their phones, recording the scene as Robert squirmed under the weight of their judgment. Caleb stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with authority. "I think it's clear," he said, addressing Samantha directly, "that this isn't an isolated incident. If Roberts feels comfortable enough to say this in front of a crowd, imagine what happens when no one is watching." Samantha looked cornered, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Evans," she began, her voice shaking, "we'll launch a full investigation, I promise." "No," Monica interrupted, her voice steady but filled with determination. "That's not good enough." The crowd quieted, their attention snapping back to her. Monica turned to face them, her head held high. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice carrying across the terminal. "This is about every person who's ever been judged for the way they look, the way they dress, or the color of their skin. It's about a system that allows people like him to abuse their power without consequence." Her words hung in the air, powerful and undeniable. The crowd erupted into applause, their support washing over Monica like a wave. Caleb smiled softly, proud of the woman standing beside him. As the dust settled, Caleb turned to Samantha. "You've got a bigger problem than just one rogue agent," he said. "This system is broken, and unless you want this to become a public relations nightmare, you'll fix it, starting today." Samantha nodded reluctantly. "Roberts will be terminated immediately," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'll personally oversee a review of our training protocols." "That's a start," Caleb said, "but it's not enough." "What more do you want?" Samantha asked, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Caleb leaned in slightly, his voice low but deadly serious. "I want accountability. Public accountability, a formal apology. Not just to my wife, but to every passenger who's ever been mistreated by your staff. And I want it on record." Samantha swallowed hard, realizing she had no other option. "I'll arrange it," she said. As the crowd dissipated and the airport's normal rhythm resumed, Monica stood still, her thoughts spinning. The incident with Roberts wasn't sitting right. There was something more, something deeper, behind his actions and his arrogance. She could feel it. "Caleb," Monica said softly but firmly, "I need to know who this man really is." Caleb nodded, understanding immediately. Pulling out his phone, he made a few calls, tapping into his extensive network. It didn't take long for answers to surface, and they were worse than either of them had anticipated. Roberts wasn't just a petty bully on a power trip. Over the years, he'd racked up multiple complaints from passengers, including allegations of harassment and unnecessary searches. Each case had been quietly dismissed, buried under bureaucracy. It became clear the system had protected him, "They let him stay," Monica said, her voice low and trembling with anger as Caleb showed her the information. "After everything he's done, they just looked the other way?" "Over and over again," Caleb replied, "but not this time." Monica's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about her gown or her own humiliation anymore. It was about every person who had been silenced, dismissed, or mistreated. If no one had held Roberts accountable before, then she would. Monica and Caleb acted quickly. Within hours, they compiled testimonies from passengers who had filed complaints against Roberts in the past. Caleb's connections ensured the story reached a respected journalist, someone who wouldn't shy away from exposing the truth. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. The public outcry was immediate. Social media exploded with hashtags, passengers sharing their own stories of mistreatment at airport checkpoints. The attention grew far beyond Roberts. It became a scathing critique of the entire system that had enabled him. 2 days later, TSA officials held a press conference. The grim-faced supervisor, Samantha Pierce, acknowledged the systemic failures. She outlined sweeping changes, mandatory retraining for TSA staff, an independent review board for complaints, and a public apology to those affected. Monica and Caleb attended the conference, standing silently at the back. The changes were a step forward, but Monica knew that apologies and promises wouldn't be enough. Real change required vigilance, and she wasn't about to let the issue fade into the background. When the press conference ended, reporters turned to Monica. Stepping forward, she addressed them with a calm but commanding presence. She spoke not just about her experience, but about the broader issues of power, prejudice, and accountability. Her words resonated, sparking a wave of support across the country. As Monica and Caleb left the press conference hand in hand, she felt a sense of vindication. But she also knew this wasn't the end. The fight for justice and respect didn't end with one victory. It was a long, ongoing battle. And Monica was ready to keep fighting. As Monica and Caleb sat together on their balcony one evening, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, she turned to him with a soft smile. "I never imagined any of this would happen," she admitted. "I just wanted to get to Paris." Caleb chuckled, squeezing her hand. "Sometimes the detours end up being more important than the destination." She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. The fight wasn't over, but Monica had learned something about herself through it all. She was stronger than she'd ever realized, and with her voice, her platform, and the support of those who believed in her, she was ready for whatever came next. Monica's story isn't just about one woman's fight for justice. It's about the power of speaking up and the change that can happen when we refuse to be silent. But what do you think? If you were in Monica's position, would you have handled things the same way? And how can we work together to create a world where respect is the standard, not the exception? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and join the conversation. And if this story resonated with you, take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to Elderly Wisdom for more stories that inspire, empower, and remind us of the lessons life teaches us every day. Your support means everything, and together we're building a community that values kindness, courage, and the wisdom of experience. Thank you for listening, and I can't wait to share the next story with you soon.